Current temperature in central Boulder, 84 degrees. A tornado watch is in effect until 11 o'clock this evening for the Front Range of Colorado. Overnight lows tonight in the low to mid-50s with a 40% chance of rain. Continued chance of rain tomorrow, and temperatures on Monday forecast to reach the mid to upper 70s. An hour of international news from the BBC coming your way at 6 o'clock. Stay tuned next for Antithesis here on KGNU Boulder.
Good afternoon and welcome to Antithesis.
Antithesis is a weekly radio soiree of stimulating commentary and entertaining conversation discussing issues of importance in our daily lives.
Antithesis airs Sunday afternoon at 5:30.
I'm Richard Curtis.
I'm Leo Griep-Ruiz.
The opinions expressed on Antithesis are the opinions of the person speaking them,
and do not necessarily represent the views of the board, staff, or management of KGNU or of us here at Antithesis.
Because I might not agree with him.
And I might not agree with him.
Who's the terrorist? On April 22nd, 140 Peruvian army commandos burst into the Japanese ambassador's residence in Lima, Peru. The soldiers killed 14 members of the Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement, or MRTA, and freed 71 hostages who had been held there since late December. One hostage and 2 soldiers were also killed. The Tupac Amaru were demanding the release of about 400 of their members currently held in the world's most cruel prisons in Peru and Bolivia. During and after the crisis, Peru's President Fujimori, parroted by the corporate media pundits up north, referred to the Tupac Amaru as terrorists. We hear that word an awful lot these days. According to my dictionary, a terrorist is one who uses extreme fear as a means of coercion. So, are the Tupac Amaru really terrorists? Did they take the hostages in order to instill extreme fear among some sector of the Peruvian population? Did the Tupac Amaru engage in systematic violence and cruelty to make their point? Did they brutalize or murder any of the hostages? The answer to all of these questions is a resounding no. The Tupac Amaru is not now a terrorist organization. However, there are terrorists in Peru, and they are the government. Peru is, in point of fact, a terrorist state. Why is this never mentioned in the corporate press? According to human rights groups, law organizations, and independent observers, Peru has the worst, most corrupt, and abusive legal system in the world. Now, this is no small accomplishment, the world's worst legal system. Why would any country have a legal system which provides virtually no legal protections or rights for its citizens? In Peru, the legal system is a mechanism of state terrorism. The government of Peru uses extreme fear through the police, army, courts, and prisons as a means of coercing the populace. During the hostage situation, the so-called terrorists were cordial to their captives, and in the long months of negotiations, never harmed a single one. Even as the Peruvian army was bursting in and assassinating the rebels, some as they tried to surrender. Every rebel was found with a bullet hole in the forehead, in addition to their other wounds. The Tupac Amaru did not even then harm any of the hostages. Most likely, Fujimori knew that the Tupac Amaru had no terrorist leanings, no intention of killing the hostages, and this allowed him to overwhelm them with violence. The governments of Peru, Japan, and the United States have all said that the situation shows that they're not going to tolerate or negotiate with terrorists. These claims ring all the more hollow as we find out more and more about the brutality and savagery of the Peruvian government, one of the best-funded terrorist organizations in the world. It is a fact of life that even the best-funded terrorist organization in the world cannot keep the people of an entire nation oppressed forever. There are 2 revolutionary armies in Peru. One has a long history of violence against people and the state. That is the Shining Path. The Tupac Amaru has a history of bold thefts, but surprisingly little violence. The Shining Path has always been critical of the Tupac Amaru for this reason, its unreasonable civility in the face of state barbarism. The brutality and poverty which created the Shining Path and the Tupac Amaru remain and are intensifying. The revolutionary forces will continue on in spite of their losses. The Shining Path and Tupac Amaru will grow in spite of the state terrorism because Peru is ripe for revolution. However, what was once the Robin Hood of revolutionary groups, the Tupac Amaru, may, as a result of its direct experience with the real terrorists in Peru, now turn to violence and terror. If Fujimori is comfortable using such obvious terrorism against his people, then the people may decide that they also must use terrorism against Fujimori and his ilk. The chickens of violence and terrorism will come home to roost. The war in Peru is far from over, in spite of what some would have us believe.
Well, so that's what you want to talk about this week?
Well, someone had to talk about it.
Hasn't anybody talked about it? I mean, you know...
Does anyone talk about it?
Not on the west side.
You haven't talked about it?
No.
Oh, man.
Nope.
See, I told you.
I haven't heard it.
Someone's got to talk about it.
Well, let's talk about our guest.
Okay. Joining us in the studio for this show, we have Patricia Ramierez de Runningbear. How's that?
Está bien. Está bien.
Okay.
Yeah. You work at
I'm
the
getting better.
inner city parish?
Denver Inner City Parish.
What do you do
Sure.
there?
I'm an associate director there. We have human service programs, dealing basically with seniors all the way to children. Pretty much prevention and intervention is our
So
philosophy.
you see what's going on, like, on the west side, like, for real?
For real. For real. For real being the concern of dropout rates, the pregnancy, the not a very right-in-your-face kind of crime or drug, but there's a tendency always there because kids just drop out.
What do you think of this business of what happened in Peru?
Well, it's definitely an example of what happens when society and communities, I'm sure they all have their little communities, they all have their little dropouts there, and it's this is the top of it. It becomes when people become rebels. They have no choice. And I think that's compared to what's going on possibly with the youth gangs. They have no choice at times. They feel they have to take control. The schools don't want them. The parents throw them out sometimes. And, of course, the institutions want them, and they don't want to go to institutions, so they think by holding a gun and being really bad, they have power. And with that power is rebellion. And rebellion is how it's compared to in Peru.
You know, Richard, something you didn't mention when you were in your commentary there was that one of the issues that came up was that the bodies were not given to the families. And so there's some question as to whether everybody, in fact, is really dead.
Well, I suppose that's true. Yeah, I mean, there's could be they were doing that just to mess with people's heads.
You know, one of the things that came up a lot in the international press, or more in the Latin American press than in anything that I've seen in the United States press, is that there's this man, Vladimiro Montesinos, who has been the power behind Fujimori's throne, and that he's a serious hardline kind of cat. You know, the week before, just a couple of days before, actually a few days, 3-4 days before the Peruvian authorities moved in on the embassy, the man who was responsible for overseeing the negotiations with the MRTA resigned under pressure. And the position was then taken over by a couple of serious hardliners. And Montesinos is seen to have been one of those people, and his name is coming up more. If anybody out there has hooked up to the internet, you can look him up on what Covert Action Information Bulletin has on him.
He's from Fujimori's security staff, that kind of...
He was a young man who, he started out, he was a military guy who was a young officer and who apparently was a very strong personality, who seemed to get the goods on a lot of people just because he was so charming and so personable. And he had his own office early on, and he went around helping all of these guys. I don't know what kind of help he provided them, but he's been directly involved in a number of murders and in a number of incidents of torture. And he's a man for whom no known photograph exists.
Sounds a little like Marcus Wolf, a man without a face, who's the head of the East German intelligence.
Well, I mean, he's one of those kinds of guys.
Very secretive.
One of the things too that that people haven't touched on in this situation, man. I'm a Salvadoreño, through my mother. My mother was from El Salvador. I grew up with a profound sense of that identity. Lived in El Salvador about a quarter of my life by the time I was 12. Went through all kinds of changes in the late 70s and then became an activist in the early 80s because of the horrors of the death squad government. And in doing the organizing that I did, I learned more than I ever thought I would know, and certainly more than I care to know, about the physical reality of torture and mutilation and ways of using human remains to literally as a tool of psychological warfare against the population. I know more than I want to share with you guys or our listeners. And one of the things, I had a friend who was told by his friends, he was a newspaper reporter, an editor, who was told by his friends that he should carry a gun. Somebody offered him something like a 22 or a 25 caliber little semi-automatic, little like Saturday Night Special kind of gun. And he said, "Oh no, first of all, I don't want to carry a gun, and secondly, what good is that going to do me?" Mm-hmm. And they said, no, we don't. The reason we're giving you the gun is so that when they come for you, you can pull it, and then they'll have to shoot you down, and at least you'll die quickly.
Sheesh.
You see,
pragmatic planning.
And I've known people that would carry like a sheet of steel inside their briefcase that was very heavy because if somebody came gunning for them, they could pick it up. And I think that one of the issues that people have to deal with here realistically is that if the members of the MRTA who were in that embassy were in fact killed with a gunshot to the head, that frankly, given the history of not just the governments of Guatemala and El Salvador, but also given the history of Chile and Peru, that they might well have been fortunate to have died quickly. Mm-hmm.
Well, and the fact that they're all advised in these matters by experts from...
Yeah, anybody who has not seen the movie State of Siege should definitely see the movie State of Siege, which explains a little bit about the United States' role in Uruguay. Man, it was bad. Something else, too, that people got to deal with, I think, is that in any situation of combat, people who are involved in close combat, I'm a veteran, I was not in combat. I refused to serve in Vietnam. Got into a fair amount of trouble, but it helped educate me for that. But standard operating procedure in situations like this, in any kind of close combat, is that the enemy gets a slug in the head.
You want to make sure.
People want to make sure that that person is indeed dead, because they don't want to crawl by what they think is a corpse and then have the corpse come to life and shoot them. So that's another part of the reality of this stuff. I wrote about this in something I did recently. I can't remember where, but what I said was that Che Guevara never complained about getting shot at. He complained about a lot, social conditions, economic circumstances, but I think that when people get to the point of taking up weapons against an enemy, that they have to deal with the repercussions of that. And frankly, I'm surprised that given the nature of what the MRTA was doing, that I don't understand why a person would, why a group like that would take hostages and just hold them for so long. I'm not going to advocate violence against anyone except for the defense of someone who's being abused. But just looking at it from a purely, military standpoint, there have been a lot of kidnappings. The MRTA was involved in a lot of them as well, and in El Salvador, Guatemala, lots of places, Mexico, where people are kidnapped for ransom in order to raise funds, for a revolutionary organization. And in El Salvador, there's not one case, at least not one case that I know of, and I don't know of any either in either Guatemala or in Mexico for that matter, where people have been kidnapped for political reasons, where the kidnappers have killed those people or injured them in any way. Because if that were to be done, then the deal is off and nobody's going to get no more money for doing that kind of activity. But this is not what the MRTA was doing, and I'm surprised, frankly, that they didn't shoot somebody to show that they were serious.
I don't think they had the heart for it.
You know,
The political heart.
The moral heart for it. I think that's the whole. That was part of their problem. The MRTA, where they were decent human beings, and they were doing this in order to free people, and they didn't have the stomach for just killing people, especially people that sort of stumbled into the situation. Although obviously some of those people who had stumbled into the situation were leaders of Peru's military, who may indeed have been war criminals and deserved that kind of treatment, but nonetheless, they didn't get it.
And then you raise the issue of terrorism. I think it's really important the way there's all of this inflation. Not only, I bought a pack of gum before coming to the studio today. It was 25 cents. Now, when I was a kid, it was a nickel. That's my rule of thumb, is that everything has gone up 500% since I was a kid. The soda pop that cost a dime cost 50 cents. We go on, everything's like that, Well, the word terror, there's this inflation in terms of the use of words. It's like this word terrorism at one time meant specifically the use of violence against uninvolved, random, non-military victims for the purpose of creating terror.
Well, let's bring it down to the community level. Most of these gangs, so-called gangs, I hate the word gang, but it's self-defense. From a political standpoint, for example, a mother now who is a mother to a so-called gang is now a gang mother. Okay? I know a recent case where a person goes across to Mexico to visit family, returns on the border in Laredo, somewhere in that area. There's a riot going on between the cholos, the youth, border youth, Mexican youth, and the police. And this mother happens to be there crossing. There's pictures taken all over the place. They stop them, they arrest them. Okay, fine. She's gone over, she's come back.
So when you say arrest them, are you saying that they arrested her family members or her?
No, they were arresting others.
Arresting youth. Okay.
Yeah, in her case, she was stopped, was taunted and all this, but that just crossing the border and then coming back, her youth have been incarcerated. One's in Canyon, one's on parole, and this. But just that experience that she's pretty much feels that she's on the FBI list because she crossed the border. She's in it, just perfect timing to be in the middle of this riot. So they're connecting her being a youth gang mother, basically having a child who's turned into having some kind of gang affiliation, which she still denies. Goes across the border, comes back, and now there's another piece of red tape. Granted, it's not a. Hopefully, it's not a. I mean, she could technically be called a terrorist. They can play with words so much. I mean, this is a person from the west side or Denver who just simply goes across to Mexico, comes back, and they're right there. The inflation of the word terrorist.
And something that I think few people in the movement have looked at is this anti-terrorist legislation.
And it's ridiculous because basically she has no freedom to move anywhere. Anytime she stops, they run a check on her. Oh, now she's a gang mother, therefore there must be something else behind it.
So when she crossed the border, that came up?
Yes. Well, she's already... Denver is one of the biggest gang units in the nation. And they've gotten everything down for the mother, the father, who's been in, who's been... It's a good tracking system now. And it's not real official. They don't send you an official letter. They just pretty much know who is who. And they have different ways of tagging people.
And this would be the intelligence unit inside the Denver Police Department.
Basically, it's real... called a gang unit.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, no secrecy to it, and people are on it.
We should probably mention that you're listening to Antithesis, a regular feature on KGNU on Sundays, and we're speaking this evening with Patricia Ramierez, the Runningbear.
And something, another new feature. Another new feature. If you have comments or ideas about this program, you can communicate us by email.
Leo got us email.
We got email. We got email.
And that address would be?
Okot.
Oh, my.
Okot. It's not that. O-C-O.
For those of you who aren't familiar with Nahuatl.
Nahuatl.
Oh, okay. Oh, see, I can't even
Nahuatl.
say the name right.
O-C-O-T-L.
O-C-O-T-L.
At AOL.com.
Ooh, okay. There we go. That's an easy one.
Okotl at owl. Okotl, O-C-O-T-L at AOL.com. We want your ideas. We want your comments. We want your suggestions. And you're talking to us now. So if you want to complain, you still got to get hold of the station.
That's right. And they have a whole comment line for that.
Yeah, and there's the comment line, too. So please, call the comment line. Because, and the show's been extended.
We got word. We're running through the summer.
Yes,
right on.
We're going through the summer, all the way to the fall.
It'll be fun. Well, let's get back to anti-terrorist legislation, because I think you brought that up at a very timely point, and that's important.
This is something, now, the anti-terrorist legislation, which was finally passed by the United States Congress, redefines terrorism. See, this is something cute that a lot of people don't understand. We're used to using words as, in terms of what they mean in the dictionary. I want to know what that word means, so I look it up in the dictionary.
Right.
However, if I looked up terrorism in the dictionary, it would probably say something like what I said before, the use of terror. That is, attacking uninvolved non-combatants for the purpose of creating terror.
Webster's in the commentary there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, however, there is also what's called a legal fiction. Words are defined in a lot of legislation for the purpose of that legislation. That's what it says. It says, for the purpose of this legislation, this word means, and then they give their own definition.
Postmodern government.
It's like the word sovereignty, right? A lot of people say, oh, well, Chicanos are not indigenous people because they ain't got sovereignty. You see, we got sovereignty. And what they're talking about is having Bureau of Indian Affairs recognition for a tribe who has a relationship with the U.S. government, and that relationship has as a part of its one of its legal definitions, the word sovereignty, meaning whatever the U.S. government wants it to mean, not meaning what it means in the dictionary, which is people having their own power. And in this case, the word terrorism has come to mean anything which threatens the national security of the United States, and a function of its national security is its economics.
Which actually is the only sense in which they use national security anymore.
And
it's not just ordinary people's economics either. It's somebody in particular's economics.
Exactly. So the way the law is now with passage of the anti-terrorist legislation, which was basically bulldozed its way through Congress right after the Oklahoma City bombing, interestingly. If, for example, a group of EZLN supporters in Mexico were to barricade a building in which some Mexican government agronomists are located, who happen to be working on the United States Agency for International Development project, and they can't get out because there's this protest going on, then those people and their umbrella organization, not just their immediate organization, but other organizations they belong to, whatever the umbrella group would be, could be considered terrorists under this law. It just takes the president saying, those guys, I don't like them, they're terrorists. Then by law they are terrorists, and then if I were to give money to, let us say, an orphanage or to a school, an education project, in which people who belong to those individuals' organization, the ones who did this demonstration, let us say, then I would be in violation of that law because I have given money to a group which is involved in terrorist activity. So if it's crazy. It's basic, and what it does is it specifically criminalizes exactly the kind of activities that a lot of us undertook in the 80s doing Central American solidarity and anti-intervention work. And a lot of people,
for the basis of human rights,
in order,
and belief, and
just very basic, medical aid to El Salvador, for example. There was medical aid to Guatemala going on. Those projects right there. Rebuilding a health clinic or a school in Esteli in Nicaragua, for example, were activities which could have been criminal under this law had the law existed in the 80s. And, given that the largest obvious immediate base of support for the Zapatista struggle is in the Chicano community because of the nature of the identity between people, a lot of people are looking at this and thinking, oh boy, this provides this is the wedge to break into a lot of kinds of community activity. Of course, not saying that Chicanos exclusively are working on this stuff, because everybody all over the country is working on this stuff.
But they obviously pick and choose enforcement issues.
Where
to enforce. Yeah.
And
Right.
given the nature of the immigration struggles and the fact that, frankly, I think that there is not a Chicano alive who does not have a close friend or family member who has been deported. We hate the border.
Chicano Mexicanos, right?
We hate the border. It's hard to explain how much we hate something which has literally divided our families. We have, all of us, have people who've been swooped up and taken away. And in some cases, your favorite aunt, uncle, all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, here is this obvious base of support, and here's this legislation, and here's this use of this word terrorism, and we're seeing now with this kind of electronic communications, which I think we should get into in another program, but it's now possible to track anybody on this planet with global positioning satellites, what they call the GPS, which is being used now in more expensive automobiles for computer-driven maps, which is now being used with a digital synthesizer, a voice synthesizer, to guide blind people. A little computer in a backpack. That same kind of technology can easily be used to pinpoint the location of anybody on the planet. And, we're dealing with some serious stuff.
Well, the thing that seems to me even more ominous is the fact that we can anticipate that these struggles are going to become more intense in Latin America, but they're also going to become more intense here in this country as working people's and poor people's social position continues to deteriorate. And so this terrorist or so-called anti-terrorist legislation that didn't exist in the 1960s and 70s when the Black Panthers were around, or when AIM was particularly active, when people join together to begin struggles, even political struggles, legitimate political struggles, they're going to be banded terrorists, and all of those people are going to end up in jail before they have
Including
a
the Boy
chance to do
Scouts
anything.
and the Girl Scouts?
Probably, if they ever start doing anything meaningful.
Where
does it end?
Their intent is military.
As long as their cookies
futures
don't crumble. This is one of those really disgusting moments, Richard, when I come to realize that I think we agree.
Yeah, it's true. That's how we build a show, is disagreeing. Sometimes we fail miserably to
Is that right?
disagree.
We try really hard. Yeah, we try really hard.
Well, I didn't like what you said earlier then, Richard.
Okay.
About the economic base. It depends on who they're going to pick and choose.
How to enforce laws.
I think those, especially here, people in Boulder, they feel they're kind of protected because they're not them. And I know they don't even think of that way. But the fact is, when it comes down any type of political terrorism, if they even have especially in Boulder, they're so human rightists, they help El Salvador, help Nicaragua, help Chiapas. They're going to be the first ones on the list. And my
That's
God,
true.
They are citizens of the United States. So economics is not going to help them.
Am I the only one who refuses to go see the Dalai Lama because it costs money, a lot of which is going to go to the government of Denver, which has no interest whatsoever in manifesting any form of the Dalai Lama's beliefs?
Oh, no, I'm not going because I think he's a fringe right-wing fundamentalist. And
Dalai Lama's a fringe right-wing?
and I don't understand the fascination.
I don't know if I'm going to touch that.
Ooh,
Well,
sorry.
anything
You can't say that on KGNU.
Well, the issue, what I've noticed with the way that a lot of people talk about him is sort of this vestigial
what,
sort
though?
of
I got
people.
bad news.
People really want to have a pope, and I don't understand why people want to have a pope. You know, it seems to me that
It's happening again.
it's that time. It's time to go.
Ahí nos vemos. Adelante, gente.
Okay, Patricia Ramierez de Runningbear, thank you very much.
Igualmente.
Patricia is from the Denver Inner City Parish.
That's right.
Working with the people.
And we will feel the terrorism in our communities because they end up coming to us. Lack of shelter, food, harassment, police brutality.
This is Antithesis.
And don't forget,
Thanks
you
for
can
listening.
communicate with us by ocotl@aol.com. And, of course, call the radio station and let them know that what you think.
499-7111. Bye.
Talk to you later.
You can hear Antithesis Sunday afternoons at 5:30 on KGNU Boulder, 88.5 FM with translator K260 AC in Fort Collins, Colorado at 99.9 megahertz, and translator K229 AC in Ward, Colorado at 93.7 megahertz. The tornado watch is in effect for much of Colorado's Front Range.